you everyone for making it here today. I think today's session is one of the sessions that we've been doing since we launched the Hub 71 Plus digital asset. We've been working very hard over the past few months to bring together the right ecosystem around Web3, the right stakeholders in digital assets to help grow Abu Dhabi into the right capital for this field in general. We've had a lot of partners supporting us in the launch of this initiative, and everyone knows in Hub 71 we do very minimal things ourselves and we rely heavily on partners. And today we have one of the most active partners with us in this initiative from Algorand to give us a bit of a dump of blockchain 101, a bit on the journey towards what Algorand is doing, and then mix into innovation and how startup world gets into that field. We have Staci Warden with us, who's the CEO of Algorand Foundation. I briefly looked at your profile this morning another time, and I was looking, you went to Harvard, you worked in the Treasury Department, NASDAQ, JP Morgan, Milken, and then you did the shift into this blockchain and Web3 space. I think that's personally for me a great testament about the future of the blockchain. I'd love to hear more about your background. Why did you do this shift? Tell us a bit more about it.
Okay, well, thank you very much for having me here. I'm super excited to be here. I think you're all a little bit spoiled as startups, I will say. They're having this lovely office space. You know, our idea in the US is that you're supposed to start in a garage, preferably very dusty, you know, and this is quite nice. And if I don't make sense or I make any mistakes, it's completely Peter's fault because he kept us out late last night and we had to get up early to come here. So I have always been, throughout my career, very focused on financial inclusion and very focused on the ability for entrepreneurs to get access to capital. And the way that I and many people think about it is that and especially in emerging markets and developing countries where I spent most of my career, if households have a way to invest their savings in entrepreneurs rather than just keeping them in banks, and often the interest rate that you make on your deposit is negative in real terms, so it's lower than the inflation rate in the economy. And so if a country can develop capital markets so that household savers can invest in entrepreneurs, those entrepreneurs can grow. Then when their companies grow, they can hire more people and they can pay those people more, and then you get better household savings and you get this kind of virtuous circle of economic growth. And it's very much a private sector-led growth model. So I have always been interested in that. And I've always really dedicated my career to that kind of the belief in that model, broadly speaking. And so, but it doesn't work in many ways, and it leaves many people out of the financial system. So when I first when I first became exposed to Bitcoin, and I have we all have I would call it the falling down the rabbit hole story. And mine, I think, is different than anybody's I've met anyway, which is that I was running, when I was at the Milken Institute, I ran the Center for Financial Markets in Washington there, and I was training people on financial markets. And I, in particular, had a program with the National Institute for the Press to make the press better at finance. I failed a little bit in this program. I mean, I would say they're not really that much better about finance, but never mind. And they asked me, there's this Bitcoin thing, this is in 2013, there's this Bitcoin thing, that we're getting a lot of requests for that. So I said, okay, well, I'll find an expert. I couldn't find an expert. So I said, okay, well, I might as well. I had heard about it and I might as well learn it. So I remember my house was being renovated and I was living in this like little one-bedroom apartment while this renovation was going on. And I locked myself in this apartment for like 4 days and, emerged 6 pizzas later, basically in love with this idea. And I thought it wasn't quite Bitcoin is not quite fit for purpose for what I thought it could do, but it got me quite interested in it. And then so the first time I learned it, was because I had to teach it. And then I just took it from there, and it was kind of a side hustle, and then more and more and more. And then I joined Algorand as a board member last year and became the CEO this year. And Algorand is a layer 1 blockchain.
So I've been personally trying to get into this field, teach myself exactly what you did a few years later. Yeah. Can you explain to the people in the audience what's a layer 1? We hear a lot of buzzwords. We hear blockchain, Web3, crypto. How does this whole world come together? And then what's the role of a layer 1 like Algorand in this whole world?
Yeah, okay. So does anybody here own any crypto at all? Any Any big? Okay, great. All right. Wow. Has anybody participated? So you can go to Binance and you can buy crypto and you can hold it. But has anybody then taken that crypto and put it into a wallet and participated in let's call it DeFi? Or do you mostly use exchanges? Okay. All right. Great. Ryan, you don't count. Okay. So the idea of banking innovation and financial markets innovation for the last, let's call it 2 decades, has been about every bank has a balance sheet. And the messaging between those balance sheets has gotten faster, more reliable, and cheaper. So that messaging back and forth between balance sheets, and that's how money moves. The blockchain is a fundamentally different construct. There is no sense in which a Bitcoin moves, actually. It is on one ledger. And so there is no moving from balance sheet to balance sheet. Everything is written to one big ledger. So Algorand has a ledger, Binance Smart Chain has a ledger, Bitcoin, Ethereum, they have a ledger. And if you're going to have all the transactions right, and if you don't know anything else about blockchain, that's the one thing you really, really need to understand. There is this one, let's call it balance sheet or ledger. And then if somebody is going to, if all of the transactions in your world are going to be on this ledger, it's very important that one entity does not control that ledger. That ledger has to be owned by a number of different parties. And the more the better, the more decentralized the better. And that also, the way that those, let's call them computers, the way those computers interact with each other has to be resilient, even if they don't know each other, they don't trust each other, and even if a certain number of them are evil or a certain number of them fail, that ledger can't go down. And so the whole juice behind the idea of a blockchain is how do you get all of those computers to agree on the order of transactions in that ledger and come to the same conclusion and not fight with each other about it. So that's what a blockchain does. And so the reason that this is just groundbreaking is that, you know, I like to use this, I like to say this example a lot, is that you can send, if you are living in, Nigeria and you want to send a movie to somebody living in Malaysia, you can do that in a minute. You can send the movie over WhatsApp. It's like no big deal. But if you want to send $10 from Nigeria to Malaysia, that $10 has to travel through the correspondent banking system, clear at the Fed, travel back down the correspondent banking system. 6 or 7 out of these things go through, these wire transfers go through on the first time. Toll people take their cut. It can come, 6 to 10 days later, and somebody's taken 5% off the top. If it's all on one ledger, you can send that transaction immediately. It will clear seconds later, and it will be absolutely final, and it's verifiable. And so that's what a blockchain gives to you. And the implications of that, ladies and gentlemen, are profound. And one of the most important ones, and I can talk about all of them, but one of the most important ones is that it enables micropayments. And so then you can start charging for tiny things. You can start monetizing tiny things because the transaction costs, at least on Algorand, are unnoticeable, basically. And so just think of all the economic activity. And I know you guys your core mission is to spur economic activity, right? Think of all the economic activity that you can generate if a woman can charge in a rural village, can charge for, cell phone usage, or you can charge for every time that you watch a podcast that somebody puts together. You can actually charge, not have to rely on YouTube, how many, viewers you have, how many followers you have. Just every time somebody watches it, you can make a little bit of money. All of that stuff is not possible under the current financial system, but it is possible in a blockchain type system. And so what blockchains do is we try to develop the communities that are building on the chain that we have. And so our blockchain is called Algorand. We were founded by a professor at MIT, a Turing Award winner, so that's like the Nobel Prize of computer science. He invented 2 things that cryptocurrency needs. And when he invented them, he did not have the idea to put money, to attach money to them. So that is where a lot of the genius of Satoshi Nakamoto, when she invented Bitcoin, that was a lot of the reason that she was so smart when she did it. But he invented something called zero knowledge proofs and verifiable random functions. And he saw the ecosystem of crypto develop, and he said to himself, I could probably build a better blockchain that exists now. And so because of his name, he was immediately able to raise some money. They built it from 2017 to 2019. It went live in 2019. And since then, it's never gone down for a second. It has very low transaction fees, so sub penny transaction fees. It uses the energy of charging a Tesla for 1 year. It's very green. And the reason it is all of these things very fast, it settles in 3.7 seconds, your transaction. And the reason it is all of these things is because the consensus mechanism, the way that these computers come to an agreement on something is very elegant. It's a very elegant consensus mechanism. And that's what tends to separate the different blockchains apart. How do you get these computers to agree on the order of transactions in the ledger?
Awesome. You mentioned decentralization. I think anyone in the Web3 and digital asset space is always preaching the concept of decentralization. But we've been seeing, and one of the biggest roadblocks of this whole industry has been the risk of decentralization. Regulations, KYC, making sure people are not manipulating the blockchain. What is Algorand doing and similar layer ones doing to give confidence to the regulators, to give confidence to the consumers that when I send $5 to Staci, it's not being lost, I'm not sending money laundered money? What's the regulatory framework looking like globally? I know regulations still don't exist for layer ones, but what are the layer ones doing to make sure that you're self-regulating in a way?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. And when you look at, crypto had an absolutely horrible year this past year, as you all know. I mean, absolutely horrible. And when you think about the layer ones are really just the infrastructure. So it's like we're going to disappear into the background after a while. So when I send you email, I don't say, did you get the email I sent you over HTTP? I just say, did you get the email I sent you? So right now, it's a big thing to say I'm building on Algorand, but eventually will probably fade into the background a bit. But last year, what happened is, if you have opaque financial entities, they need to be regulated, right? So you don't have any particular insight into what's going on at your bank, but you know that they're regulated and they do have, they issue quarterly reports and whatnot, and that gives you confidence. Maybe not as much confidence as you had before, but anyway, it gives you confidence. And if you have a DeFi protocol, such like a trading protocol or a lending protocol, you can see all of the transactions that have happened in that protocol, and your engagement with that protocol is determined by code. I'll talk about that in a minute, but you can also look at the code behind the protocol. So you have transparency into that, and that can substitute for a large degree for regulation. So if you lend money in a smart contract on a DeFi protocol, when that borrower, and it's always over collateralized, so you want to borrow like $5, you have to give $10 in order to borrow it. There's reasons why you would still want to do that. But if your $10 in assets, say, goes below $5, that protocol will immediately grab those assets and make sure that I, as a lender, am made whole. That's very important. And so I don't have to trust the borrower. I don't have to do a credit check on the borrower. I don't even need to know who the borrower is, because I know that that code will execute that trade. That code is not going to call the borrower and say, hey, do you need a few days to sort yourself out? I know you're dropping your daughter off at college this weekend, but really, please give the money back in your account by Monday. None of that happens. It just executes, and I get made whole when that collateral is no longer good. What happened this year, though, is that there were these entities in the middle that acted and declared themselves to be kind of DeFi protocols, and also declared themselves to be kind of bank-like protocols. And that was a very dangerous place for them to be. So the crypto folks thought that they were decentralized, and the retail customers thought that they were bank-like, because they use what we call skeuomorphic words, old words that didn't have the meaning that they attributed to them. So they use words like custody and yield and APR, which mean very specific things in a regulated banking, but they were also not decentralized entities. They were centralized entities that, like Celsius is a good example, right? It acted like it was a crypto entity, and it also talked to retail customers as if it was a bank-like entity. And that's where that middle ground, and the hipsters in crypto call this CeFi, by the way. So if you want to be a crypto hipster, that's the word to use. And that is where all of the trouble happened, especially in the wake of the Terra Luna. Now, the Sam Bankman-Fried stuff, that was just pure fraud. That could have happened in anything. It just happened to be digital assets, but that was just straight down the middle of the road fraud.
Good.
Alleged fraud.
So you mentioned that if I send an email, I don't know what the infrastructure behind it is, and that's a very interesting way to transition into projects being built on the blockchain.
You probably do know, but the average person doesn't.
How can startups in the Web2 space that don't have any understanding of the blockchain leverage the Algorand technology or even any layer one? What's the 101 first step to do for an average Web2 startup to move on to the Web3 without understanding anything of this world?
Right. It's very hard to do. It's almost impossible to do on any blockchain except Algorand. I do want to just make sure that's clear. No, it's if you can program in Python, you're basically all set on Algorand. So we put a lot of effort behind making sure that the developer language is easy to use. Now, behind that sits a very serious, we call it an Algorand virtual machine, an AVM, and Ethereum has a EVM. Very serious, language that enables everything to happen on these distributed computers, which is pretty complicated, but you can just program in Python. And we, of course, have a whole YouTube channel and we have a very concierge level DevRel experience. So they have their Discord channels and they're in Reddit and they help you and but you can build and the technology for the smart contracts is built into the base layer of the blockchain. So you don't have to call a library like you might with Ethereum. You can just avail yourself of smart contracts that are part of the layer one. So it's super easy to mint an NFT. It's super easy to build a smart contract. It's like it'll take you 5 minutes to. Now the more complicated, if you're going to build a lending protocol, then you want to do more, of course, but it's pretty easy.
Do you have any interesting use cases that are less on the NFT or DeFi side, but more on real life use cases that leverage blockchain technology? So first step into getting into that field.
Yeah, I have a plane to catch, so I can't go through every single interesting use case, but we have so many of them, and I'll just kind of tick off maybe 4 or 5, and then I can kind of keep going if you want. And I will avoid anything that is like super crypto, so no NFTs, no DeFi, nothing like that. But of course, there's a ton of that as well. One that is very interesting is in disaster relief payments in the United States, and the reason it's interesting is because it's just so ridiculous the way it is now. So FEMA, which is our disaster relief agency, part of the government, it's taxpayer money. So they insist that disaster relief agencies go through a lot of due diligence before they give out money. It's also ripe with fraud because you can petition a bunch of different aid agencies and you can try to double dip. And so people are always trying to do that. But at the same time, people need money right away. So how do you kind of square that circle? So when we started working with the St. Vincent de Paul and the National Association of Volunteer Disaster Relief Organizations, that might not exactly be what it's called, they told me that what they do currently is a volunteer flies to the disaster relief site, the disaster site, with suitcases full of prepaid debit cards, and they hand these prepaid debit cards out to people. It's ridiculous. Nobody knows who's gotten money from whom, anything like that. So there's a wallet now on Algorand called CARE, K-A-R-E. Your house is flooded. You take a picture of yourself. You take a picture of your ID. You take a picture of your flooded living room. All of a sudden, a case manager signs off on it. All of a sudden, you have access to a list from Amazon, a predefined list of Amazon things that you can check off to get, a predefined list of things from Home Depot, which is a big home improvement warehouse store in the US, and things arrive to you the next day. And when you try again, somebody can check and make sure that you haven't already tried to dip. So disaster relief payments is a very big application for us. Another one that I think is pretty interesting, it's a bit more early stage, but is a company called TravelX based out of Latin America. And they have signed 2 now airlines in Latin America. And they do a secondary market using NFTs for airline tickets. So if you can't go on the trip, you can now sell that ticket on the secondary market instead of having to pay a fee, returning it to the airline. Maybe you can't return it. Maybe it's refundable. Maybe it's not. And so you could imagine yourself as a college student wanting to go home for Thanksgiving every year, not wanting to, being able to buy a very cheap ticket now, buying that ticket home for Thanksgiving for the next 4 years. And then if you don't make any change, you can just sell the ticket on the secondary market. Stuff like that is pretty exciting. There's a company out of Mongolia that is doing carbon credit trading at the household level. And again, that's because it's cheap to do transactions. So carbon credit is usually typically at the industrial level, but they know how much coal is used to heat a cook stove or provide electricity to a house. And anybody that installs solar panels on their cook stove or solar panels on their house, they can easily tell how much the delta is that you're saving in terms of energy. And these carbon credits are like $40. It's so small that regular finance could never pay attention to it. And they go into this little marketplace, investors buy them up, and it's just easy because it allows you to do things in micro quantities. Another really interesting one, and I mean, as I said, I could go on, but there's something called Climate Watch, where these guys put air sensors all around the world, and you can buy one. I mean, they're a little bit expensive. They're a few $100s, but you can put one, and you can monitor the air quality in your immediate environment. It's very important to put something like that on a blockchain because you don't want mayors fudging their data. Public officials, you don't want them to be able to fudge the data. So you put these all over the country, and then you can see which cities have the best air quality, and it's not maintained in a centralized place. It's maintained in a database that anybody can see that it's not been tampered with. Those are just a couple of things that I think are pretty cool.
I didn't expect that many examples.
Yeah,
but
I've got like 10 more. So
I think at least 3 of the ones you mentioned exist in the Web 2 space in Hub 71 today in our portfolio. We have very similar use cases. What's your advice to companies that have been building on the normal cloud infrastructure that can go onto the blockchain? What's the 3-step approach they need to do to get onto the chain and completely move their tech on the chain?
All right, so first, I guess my first advice is more motherly than it is practical. And that is to just make sure that your idea and your company needs to be on a blockchain, because it is a bit the flavor of the month. And a blockchain is not an efficient database. So if you can build it on a regular database, it's always going to be a better idea probably to do that. It'll be cheaper. But if you've got something where it is better that one entity does not own the database, that it needs to be independently verified. If all parties either don't 100% trust each other to maintain the data, or they need to be incented to provide data to this database, then that's a very good reason to have a blockchain. And if you then want to do that, you need somebody, a developer or an engineer on your team that knows something about distributed computing. But if you have that, then we all work with developers to make it very easy for you. And to be fair, the other smaller chains have various degrees to which that they help developers on their chains as well. So there's a good, and then, crypto is a bit culty. So if you come into the Algorand Discord, say developer Discord, a gazillion people will help you, and we have a very friendly community. So they'll help you to be excited for you. They'll talk up your project and stuff like that. And so there's a lot of community help as well. But
yeah, I think we can relate to this a lot in Hub 71. A big part of how we help the startups is just putting the startups together, and the startups end up helping each other as a community.
Yeah.
And I think the way ecosystems and industries have been built was on collaboration, and that's what we live by in Hub 71.
Yeah.
Startups collaborate with each other. We collaborate with other tech hubs, with VCs, corporates, etc. How does this look like in the blockchain industry? What type of collaboration do you need to be the pioneers of this industry and to define what the future of this industry is?
Yeah, I think that is really interesting, and I want to answer it, and then I want to abuse my time up here to ask you a question in the same idea. But it really is, and I'm not just saying this because I'm sitting with you, it really is partnerships with guys like you and organizations like Hub 71 that make it for us, because we are a nonprofit organization. We are completely open source, our code. And so we've got no dog in this fight, really, about trying to make money or trying to, and neither do you. You're about economic activity. We're about economic activity. You're about impact. We're about impact. You're about inclusion. We're about inclusion. So it's a match made in heaven. And that's the kind of thing that we can bring some infrastructure, and you bring some pipeline and some juice for people that are interested. You're a very, very important convening and focal point for people that are interested. And so this is why I think I have very high hopes and high expectations for our collaboration, because you come from the same place and the same desires that we do, and that's why I think we're gonna really make some magic together. And my question for you, though, is how did you already have a very successful space. You're running out of office space, as I understand it. Why did you decide to take this next turn to digital assets? Why is that important for your mission?
Yeah. I think in general, the leadership of the country believes in the future of this industry. We know blockchain is here to stay. We know that the previous downturn can happen in any industry. The approach that we've been taking as a government entity has been making sure that we enable the building blocks of this industry and make sure that we create this safe playground for people to come in. So the first step that we did was partner with the regulator. That was the first entity we got on board, which is ADGM, to say, before we take any step in an industry we don't understand, and we don't claim to be industry experts. There's more than 22 different sectors that exist in Hub 71 in our cohort. 22 different sectors. So we've been sector agnostic since the start. And then part of our strategy, what we did is we wanted to focus on the top 3 sectors where Abu Dhabi has a very strong proposition is. The first one is fintech and digital assets, naturally because the island we're on is ADGM, which is one of the most advanced regulators in fintech. They've had regulations on digital assets since 2018. The second one is climate tech, obviously being an oil-producing country, reducing emissions and carbon footprint, and the COP28 coming in. And the third is health tech, which is, I think, was a very big turning point in the UAE during COVID. What helped UAE grow exponentially is how fast we were able to react to COVID, and within a few weeks, life was back to normal.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So basically, these are the 3 sectors. We decided to take the tougher challenge and start with the digital asset one. The regulation is there. It's, I would say, one of the top 3 regulators in the world when it comes to digital assets. The geopolitical situation is bringing companies from all over the world to Abu Dhabi, specifically for the regulation. As an ecosystem builder, as a government tech hub, we wanted to make sure that we capture this opportunity very fast. It's a very fast world, and if we don't act fast, we will lose in the global world. So we decided to jump on that train, make sure that we're backed by the regulator. We took an extra step and went to the largest bank in the UAE, which is First Abu Dhabi Bank, and said, let's join forces. We know how to build startups. We know how to build communities and ecosystems. You guys know how to regulate and de-risk this whole setup. First Abu Dhabi Bank, you own 40% market share of the banking sector here. You will be disrupted, whether you like it or not. So it's better to disrupt yourself rather than wait for the disruption to come in.
Right.
And then we started reaching out to the likes of Algorand and the different partners that we have on board.
Yeah.
And again, I said it at the beginning, we don't do anything ourselves at Hub 71. Everything is done through partnership and collaboration. What we do is bring all the different players under one roof and let these players dictate the future of the industry. So now we have high hopes in our partnership because the regulator needs to improve the regulation and keep on moving faster than other areas. The VCs need to get educated. The layer ones need to know how to support the projects that are being built in Abu Dhabi. And then our only role is just bringing in all these great minds together to define what the future would look like.
Yeah, I was talking to the guys from Securrency last night, who I think is one of the early companies in your digital asset initiative, and they said the regulator here, the standards are extremely high, but they're very forward-thinking and helpful at the same time. And he said, you don't know how rare it is to find a regulator like that that's both. I thought that was a very interesting observation. So,
I think for us, it was the biggest push in building this initiative was the regulator. The regulator's motto is, if I don't know it, I want to learn it and test it in a safe environment. So bring whoever is doing whatever activity and let them guide us.
Yeah.
Even if you see their approach in terms of publicizing new legislation, they always publish the white papers and ask for the feedback of the community on how they think this would operate. So joining forces together, us bringing in the funnel of the best companies from around the world, and them having this, I don't want to say friendly regulator, because they are a friendly regulator in terms of opening their eyes and ears,
Yeah.
but they're also a very strict and compliant regulator.
They're approachable.
Exactly. So they're very approachable. It's not a friendly regulatory regime. It's more of a approachable regulatory regime that does not want to stop something they don't understand, but rather try to learn and create the right regulations.
Yeah.
And I think overall the country is shifting towards this direction, and hopefully we will end up being the capital for the space.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, we hope to be right there with you.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's also important to note, you mentioned the point of getting a funnel of projects onto Algorand and other layer ones. You see all over the world, companies want to find this city, this hub to set up out of, especially with what's happening in the US, especially what's happening with Asia and the different regions. And usually we work on an application basis. So every quarter we receive between 300 to 500 applications on average. The latest one we received 700, and that's across the 20 plus industries. So when we did launch this initiative and bring all these people together in mid-Feb, so that's less than one quarter ago, we received more than 600 applications of companies from again.
Which is more than you get through your other...
Which is more than we get for the other 22 sectors. That's kind of proof that companies all over the world in that space want somewhere where there's an actual ecosystem operating, not just getting a license on some island and just operating yourself, but rather people want this industry to be more structured, and that's what we're hoping to achieve out of this.
Right, and the other thing that is so unique about this and so critical is that the financial markets don't work particularly well, in particular in clearing and settlement. I have been around financial markets for a long time, and I remember in 2015 when we went from T+3 to T+2 settlement, one day, and it was like 3 years to do that, and everybody was so proud of themselves, all of that. But the thing that's hard is, no one entity in finance can move and do things better because they're all so connected. It's like the whole ecosystem has to move forward at the same time. And because Web3 is so different in its approach that we need the community. We need to kind of everybody be moving together at the same time. And I don't know how many people have been to the New Jersey end of Manhattan, but there was the Tappan Zee Bridge going from New Jersey to Manhattan. And you needed to, and this bridge was just terrible. I mean, terrible. And they needed a better bridge, but they built a whole entirely new bridge right next to it. I mean, it's not like they tore down the Tappan Zee Bridge and left, the Hudson River there that nobody could cross and then built a new bridge. You have to duplicate. So they built the second bridge, and this is the same thing that has to happen with Web3. We're going to have to be duplicative in some of these financial models and some of these financial systems, and we're certainly not going to displace the banking sector, but we'll operate and we'll take some market share and we'll do things that are better, that we can do better than they can. But we need places like Hub 71, though, so that we can all kind of inch forward together in a quasi-coordinated manner, not explicitly coordinated. And that's important. So it's key, though, that everybody has a good sense of what everybody else is doing. And that's why hubs like this are going to be so important for that.
Yeah. So I want to ask you a question and get two different answers from you. One wearing your personal Staci hat and the other wearing the Algorand hat. How do you see the future of this whole space over the next 5 to 10 years? On the Staci hat with your financial background, and on the Algorand hat with the crypto background.
Okay, so maybe I'll say the second one first. I think there is so much. Clay Christensen famously said that disruptors never do well in the beginning because they're disrupting. And I think that's where crypto is right now. But the idea of the 5 use cases for crypto and blockchain, the idea that you could have identity, self-sovereign identity, the idea that you can make micropayments, the idea that you can tokenize illiquid assets and have retail consumers be able to have a piece of ownership. I mean, so I'll go through the rest. The idea that you can have smart contracts that execute, immediately. These things are so fundamental that it is not possible that this doesn't work. It's not possible. We have another protocol building on Algorand called Lofty AI, and it has rental properties. It sets up each rental property in a DAO, so a community of voters, and everybody who buys into that DAO, invests in that DAO, can invest in this rental property and have a rental income stream. This has never been available to U.S. investors unless they were accredited rich investors. How many people can go out and buy an apartment building and have the rental income from it? But these guys, it's completely decentralized. So everybody owns one of these units, and in one, they fired the property manager. This like a little collective of mom and pop investors fired the property manager and put a new property manager. They collect that rental income. So the idea of bringing finance to the masses and having the financial inclusion and even in the States, the number of people that live on payday loans and that don't have access to a bank account, it's just astounding to me. So I think there is huge promise. And personally, I think it's kind of the same thing. It's kind of a one-way street from traditional finance to crypto, and I'm not interested, I think, in going back up that street because the potential is so much here, and the potential to have an impact is so great that when you think about your life and how you want to live your life and what you're trying to do on this earth, it's really in this space that I think I can find the most joy, I guess.
Nice. And what's the end target for Algorand? What are you working backwards from? What's the ideal vision that you see for Algorand?
Total world domination. No, we have the best tech in crypto. And so we want to make it as easy for anybody to build on Algorand as possible. And again, we're a nonprofit foundation, but we can, you can do transactions on Algorand at sub penny transaction costs. We have a very light carbon footprint. We have a very good community, and we have instantaneous settlement and some more technical things like we never fork, stuff like that. But our goal and our mission at the foundation is to just grow Planet Algorand and be a good and fertile environment for builders and for developers and for entrepreneurs. And that's our goal at the foundation, to make that as hospitable a place as possible for you guys so that you guys can unleash your creative juices and build really great things.
All right. And final question, what's one advice, one thought you want to leave everyone in this room with where 5 years down the line we'll look back and say, Staci was right?
Eat your vegetables, definitely. Because as you get older, it gets more and more important. Crypto is not a lone game. It's a social game. And so you don't wait until everything is perfect and build it in your room and not tell anybody about it. Get out there, avail yourself of the community. You're nodding and you're a successful entrepreneur, right? This is the idea. You crowdsource intelligence. You crowdsource strategy. You gotta jump in with both feet and be a part of things. And the more that you are a part of the community, the more you learn and the better you do and the more access you have to resources. Use the foundation, and it's the time to build. Don't get distracted by all of the fraudsters or the FUD or all of this, because people are in it for the long term, and they're in it because they're tourists. And don't be a tourist. If you're going to be in it, you got to be in it. And if you're in it and you take it seriously and you work hard and you avail yourselves of the community, then you will succeed in this world, because there is so much to do. There is room for everybody.
Staci, thank you very much for joining us today. I'm going to make sure that you don't miss your flight, so we can call it a day. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Peter. I really appreciate the time.